Now, it's time to say a very good morning, as we do every Wednesday, to Mr. Neil Oliver, a man who I would describe as erudite, a man who we often have a sort of specific point to kick off with. But today we don't really, Neil, but a very good morning to you nonetheless.
Hello, Mike. I'm just the ongoing struggle to maintain sanity in this time of madness.
Well, I mean, it could be worse. At least you're not in the sort of greater Glasgow area where you'd now be outlawed from actually going to visit anybody or having anybody visit you.
Yeah, that must be a real additional struggle for. I think they're quoting 800,000 people, which is a huge chunk of the population of Scotland. Really. People trying to get back to normal, kids going back to school. There's plenty going on for people, and this is just another layer of pain and inconvenience. Like you, I was listening to you saying the fact that cases are going up, but fewer people seem to be being made ill by the virus. I think it has to be explained by the authorities or visibly taken into account. Just because more and more people are showing that they have within them the virus. If they're not ill, I'm not quite sure what threat they pose to themselves or to the wider community. I mean, there was a time, hundreds of years ago, when the common cold was lethal.
Yeah.
When the Europeans arrived in South America in the 15th and 16th centuries, the common cold was killing swathes of population of the indigenous that hadn't encountered it. But now, obviously, we regard the common cold as a harmless virus, and I don't know enough about the way in which viruses evolve or how fast they can do it, but is the virus becoming something that is less dangerous? And that simply because you're finding more and more people are testing positive for it, are those people in danger? I don't know.
Well, that's it. And there are certainly plenty of medical types and plenty of doctors that I speak to on an almost daily basis who will say exactly that the virus and the sort of the size of its damage is definitely thinning out, rather like, and I've used this allegory before, rather like a hurricane that hits the land and sort of weakens as it travels across the land and becomes no longer a hurricane. It's almost like it's blown itself out, and I wonder whether that's what's happening here. But you're absolutely right.
I also feel that there has to be an extent to which people's common sense is trusted.
Yeah.
Most of us are able to make sensible decisions. Our household is 3 young kids, 17 and down in age, and my wife and I are 50-ish, and we figure our kids are coming and going from school, and we feel that's all right.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's grandparents involved. And we're being careful about that. My parents are elderly, and there's some underlying health issues there. So we're not mixing our kids in with my parents, for example.
Right.
And we're capable of making those decisions for ourselves, and I think most people are. And life is for living, and people have to be able to get on about their lives, and people should be allowed to make their own decisions about what they think is safe, what they think is tolerable for their own situation, their own health circumstances. Let people, as far as possible, get on with their lives. People sort of 50-ish and down don't seem to be at particular risk from this virus, whether they catch it or not. And I think that has to be taken into account. Or if the authorities know something else about the virus that they're not telling us, then they jolly well should tell us if there's something we don't know that we should know.
No, listen, I don't think you're wrong at all about that. And I think the trouble is there is this kind of view in government which seems to be about waiting for this all to be eradicated, and only then will we be able to return to normal. But my view is it will probably never be eradicated. It will probably always be out there somewhere, lurking about. Like we've got all sorts of different bacteria and all sorts of different viruses doing the rounds at any given time. School, for example, was always a germ factory. I mean, when my kids were smaller, and you'll probably remember this as well, in nursery school and stuff like that. I mean, I always remember September and October, everyone in the house was permanently sick in some way, shape or form, either with a tummy bug or with a cold or with something slightly worse, but it was what you got used to. And I think we need to get used to having this thing and just getting on with life.
Yeah, there's a wider insidious creeping fear of death. And a rising and insidious creeping fear of ill health at all.
Right.
People, like you say, I mean, we were always used to that when you go to school or when your kids go to nursery or whatever, when you're out there, the human race is a petri dish of infection.
Right.
And you live and you live with it. And from time to time, people get ill, and sometimes seriously ill or worse. But the human species has thrived and populated the planet by, in the main, being led by those who are not risk averse.
Right.
Where would we be now? If when the species first evolved in Africa 200, 300,000 years ago, if all the mothers and fathers had decided to keep everybody in and not go anywhere, right, and not take the chance, the world is populated by danger. There are lions and tigers and bears out there.
Right.
There's disease out there. There are challenges, and people get hurt and people get ill. But you've got to have the mindset of being prepared to take the chance, because life is out there to be seized and lived against the odds. And I don't see any benefit in developing this mindset where people think if the world isn't 100% safe and sterile, it's not safe to go out.
Right. And I wonder where it's come from, because imagine, I mean, you talked about the Europeans going to South America and discovering the Americas, as it were. Imagine if back in those times, people were too frightened to go into a boat because they might fall off the end of the world. There were people who thought like that, but they were generally thought to be the pedestrian people, the people who didn't know anything, the people who didn't really have a seeking of knowledge. They didn't want knowledge. They just wanted to stay in their own little neighbourhood because that was where they felt safe. And I feel as if we're sort of evolving backwards now into a kind of people who are frightened of everything and who don't want to walk down the street in case something falls on them.
Yeah, we've talked about this before in other contexts. This idea that we have, in the West in particular, it's been pretty safe for us since the end of the Second World War. In many ways, life has been getting better and better, safer and safer. Technology has come on in inconceivable leaps and bounds. More people are being fed, lifted out of poverty. Education and medication, pain killing, everything has got better. And I suppose it's tempting for a massive population to imagine that life is just safe. Life has been made safe, that we live in a world of plenty with multiple computer screens and television and all the tech and 2 cars and central heating and no one dies in car crashes and everything is just antiseptically safe. And that is not really the nature of life. And if we're becoming fearful of everything, and if we're most insidious of all, if we're encouraged, and we have been encouraged to become fearful of each other as filthy, dirty sources of potential contagion, and that breeds all sorts of intolerance. Once that is embedded, especially in children coming up, that they mustn't touch, and that other people are unclean. Come out from among them and be ye separate. Touch not the unclean thing.
Right.
That's been with us since for 2,000 years.
Yeah, but it's a kind of embracing of the ignorant, isn't it? Though.
Yeah. Yes, we've got to strive. We've got to life. We say to our kids all the time, life is difficult. And you will experience pain and sadness, and you'll lose people. The next generation above you and the grandparents. Eventually their time runs out. Life is full of pain.
Yeah.
And what you have to do is rise up in the face of that, and challenge all of that, and make yourself happy despite all of the challenges.
Right.
And illness and disease are just some of the risks that are out there. And we mustn't raise generations of fearful people, because that, as you say, is a retrograde backward.
Yeah.
It's against all of the principles of the species evolving and reaching out into the solar system and all the rest of it. How are we going to maintain the momentum to reach our potential as a species if we've decided that if we so much as shake hands with one another, we'll catch something and get ill and die?
Yeah. I mean, I had this conversation with Matthew Syed a little while ago around the exam results and the A-levels and the fiasco of all of the marking and everything. And he agreed with me that, It's not a bad thing for kids to fail at something. It's not a terrible thing for them to learn from their mistakes, and if you try and mollycoddle them all the way through their school system, whereby they pass everything because the standards are lowered to such an extent because the school wants to have a good looking, Ofsted report or whatever it is, and basically, everybody passes, and so it means nothing in the end. And also, they're not prepared to fail, which they will almost certainly do when they start working.
Yeah, there's a line by a French writer whose name I can't remember, but it's, "I wear a suit of armour made only of my mistakes." That is, that's crucial wisdom.
Yeah.
That it's by messing up, falling over, bothering to get back up again that you learn. That it's the obstacles that you have to overcome that stretch your muscles,
right,
that make you try harder and go on and ultimately achieve. And this, I think it is. It's across the same piece. It's trying to give people a false sense that the world can be made safe, permanently happy, no risk, live to be 100, have ripped abs and all your own teeth, never get ill, and never see anyone die.
Right.
And that's a philosophy that's guaranteed to give people expectations that can only be disappointed.
Yeah. But is it, Neil, though, possibly our own fault for this place that we find ourselves in? Because
somewhere back down the line, do you remember somewhere back down the line, we seem to talk about, helicopter parenting and wrapping everyone up in cotton wool and bubble wrap. And it certainly, it did seem, it happened during the course of my lifetime that I was someone who was let loose from a young age to go out into the wider world and play and, come home when it got dark. And then I didn't do that for our children, because by that time the situation and the climate had somehow changed, and we were all determined to keep an eye on children at all times until they were old enough to drive a car.
Right.
And I don't exactly know when that happened, when we crossed that Rubicon, but it certainly happened between my being a child and my becoming an adult and a parent.
Yes.
So clearly I take my share of responsibility for that, because I have inculcated in our children, as we all have, this idea that it's dangerous out there.
Right.
And I think maybe we have gone too far to giving children or our young the idea that the world is too dangerous to go out into. And that's and that diminishes people's potential enjoyment of life.
Well, it does, and it limits their kind of potential in a way, because it doesn't give them the impression. I mean, my parents, and I've mentioned them before, both my sister and I don't really know what it was that they gave us, but they gave both of us the kind of knowledge and confidence to go out and do whatever we wanted. We basically became what we became as a result of having that kind of enthusiasm and that adventurous spirit. I mean, we both ended up living in America. She still lives there. We didn't think anything of just picking up sticks and moving to a completely different continent. I can't imagine a lot of people doing that now.
I think ultimately what you were given there was you were encouraged to take responsibility for yourself.
Yes. From
the youngest age possible. The assumption was that you would go out where the strangers and the traffic and all the other potential dangers were.
Yeah.
But the assumption from your parents was, we've given you enough of the basics, now go out and look after yourself and take responsibility for yourself and possibly for each other. Look after your wee brother or whatever while you're out there. But people were trusted to go out, take responsibility for their own destiny. And if they fell over and hurt themselves, well, yes, that happens.
Well, exactly. Because we now live, as you say, in a very technologically well-prepared world. It's medically as good as it's ever been. If there is anything wrong with you, you've got more chance of getting better than you've probably ever had. But without asking any personal questions, how are your kids finding it being back at school? And how is the kind of the community finding it? Is it getting back to normal, do you feel?
There is to some degree getting back to normal. My older two, my 17-year-old daughter and my 14-year-old son, they have slotted back into high school quite easily, I suppose. And I suppose maybe they've got more of, because they were familiar with the school anyway. My youngest son, who's 12, he just started in first year. So high school is completely new to him. And so added to that significant change, which everyone remembers and is always quite a big step, it's complicated by wearing of masks in the corridors and in communal areas, all hand sanitizing and the various routines, the one-way system that's in place that they have to move around the school in a particular way without ever doubling back on themselves. And without a doubt, that's visibly putting a degree of stress on my youngest that neither of the other two ever had. And because they're that bit older and more experienced with the school, they're not feeling the impact of it. But my youngest is certainly quite anxious, quite visibly stressed by some aspects of school life, in addition to having made the leap from primary school to high school.
Yeah.
Anyway, you mentioned the wider community. I think there's a desperation and absolute hunger amongst all of my neighbours around here to get back to normal. You know, people are craving normality like a dying man in the desert who's desperate to reach the oasis and get a drink. That thirst for normality is palpable, and we're all trying to look on the bright side. We have been, socialising and mixing again, and we have been telling ourselves that we are going to be all right. But some of it's wishful thinking, because clearly with the Glasgow restrictions being tightened again, the authorities have awarded themselves the power, absolute power over every aspect of our lives at the moment.
Yeah. And that worries me slightly because it worries me in several ways, but mostly it worries me because it looks as though they're quite enjoying it. And I'm not sure that we want to be governed by people who enjoy putting restrictions on us.
It's hardly a surprise. I'm always slightly suspicious of people who seek power.
Yeah.
That Billy Connolly line about, the spoken ambition to be a politician should forever bar you from ever being allowed to be one.
Right.
People who want power, they want more and more power, I suppose. And this virus, this pandemic, has presented people who enjoy telling other people what to do.
Yeah.
It's up the game. And now they've got absolute power over people's lives. Go back into your house, shut the door, don't talk to your mother, get out of that shop, close that pub. That's a lethal cocktail of power to hand to people that by their own declared choice of career want.
Well, exactly, because it's a very short step from that to something a lot more draconian, right? More than it is easy to take a step back and to let go of the reins of power, because now that they've got them, I think they really want to hang on to them.
Yes, and once you get a younger generation coming up for whom this is normal, people that are just coming of age or just coming into their maturity now, if they come into their maturity in this atmosphere of accepting that you just have to be told every step you're allowed to take, every move you're allowed to make, then it becomes entrenched. Over the course, if this goes on for years, the generation coming up will be that bit more accepting of it. And it will just be a matter of waiting for the more, recidivist elders to die off with their highfalutin ideas about personal liberty.
Well, right. And the other worrying aspect of it for me, Neil, is there appear to be people out there who are very unlike you and I, who quite like it, who quite like being told what they can and can't do, because it means they have no responsibility for what they have to do.
Yes, I can't bear being told what to do.
No.
When that happened to me either, because I was pretty well behaved when I was a child, but once I became adult, I really don't like it. And we've talked about how I don't join things, I don't join clubs because clubs have rules, and I don't join parties and societies and organisations generally because you automatically accept and adopt a set of rules and restrictions on how you're to dress or how you're to speak or whatever. And I can't be doing with that. So I've always been a bit of a loner.
Well, I think you and I share those characteristics. I mean, I'll go with Groucho Marx on that one, who said, I would never want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member.
100%, yes.
But yeah, I mean, I do worry that we are in the minority, people like you and I now. Whereas I think in my parents' time, in their generation, it was the other way around.
Well, maybe it's a symptom, maybe it's a product of life being too easy. People have. It is easy to settle into a rut if the rut is lined with velvet. If life is harder, if people have less, if their homes are less lavishly furnished, if they don't have cars and television and all the entertainments and all the technology and all the protections against the vicissitudes of life, then maybe you do want to get out there into the world and grab more of what you can for yourself. But if you give battery hens good enough conditions, then they'll just settle down and lay eggs for you.
Yeah.
If you give them the antibiotics that keep them alive, and you give them just enough room to flap their wings without ever actually taking flight, then you've got yourself a captive flock, and you can pretty much take advantage of them. So I think to some extent we're living in a fur-lined rut, which
Yes.
it's seducing people into thinking, well, if I do have to be trapped in my house for 300 days a year, it's not so bad. I can watch the telly and I can watch box sets and I can FaceTime grandma in Australia, and people will settle for it because there's less for which they are striving.
And this then takes us to people who want to continue to work from home. And, and I don't mean those people, because many people have worked from home for a long time. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about those people who until the middle of March were working in an office, but who now say to me, well, why should I go back to work? I like working from home. Well, of course you like it because you don't have to do anything other than get up out of your bed, wander off to a laptop, make yourself some Weetabix, and hang about at home all day without travelling anywhere, without meeting anyone. I'm very concerned that will create a kind of second tier of society of isolationists.
Yeah, we do have a response. If we believe that we live as a society or on a smaller scale in communities, then we have a responsibility to one another and an obligation to one another. And it is part of it that when you go out, if you work in a shop or in an office, then you'll go out at lunchtime and you'll glad hand people that you know in the street. You'll go and buy a sandwich, or you'll go and sit down in a cafe and have a meal. You go and buy some things that you need in the shops you're going to take home at night, and that means that there's lifeblood circulating through the body of society.
Right.
But if everybody atomizes back into their cubicles, into their little battery cages, like battery hens, where there's food coming past on a little trench outside, and you've got just enough water, and you won't go out and contribute. Well, if we are a society, you have an obligation to contribute to society, and that means getting out there and spreading the butter around, buying things, taking advantage of services, having people do things for you, doing things for other people, and that creates society.
Yeah.
Without that, we're just a lot of battery hens living in cages.
That's the best description I've heard. Good point on which to end as well. Neil, great to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Battery hens, that's what actually is going on here. That's what people who say to me, oh, but I don't want to go back to an office. Why would I want to go back into a disease-ridden city, travel on disease-ridden trains? Why would I want to have to go and work in a place with people I don't like? Well, because that's what society is, as Neil says. It's absolutely right. That's exactly what it is. You are all behaving like battery hens.